Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 51, Marshal Blucher of the Prussian Army. We have a very special guest joining us all the way from Hessen, Germany, my good friend Philip Wagenercht. How'd I do with that?
Thank you, very good. Hope you are well too.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I invited Philip. He's a good friend of mine on Twitter. His Twitter page, it's at Pertinax. It's Pertinaxs. And he and I have been talking about Napoleon for many years. And today we're going to talk about one of Napoleon's main adversaries, a guy named Blucher. Can you tell us just in general about the good Marshal Blucher from Prussia?
Oh, I try. Yeah. I think Blucher is a very complicated personality, but on the same side, he is a very simple person.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you have to know is that Blucher is from a Prussian family,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't in Prussia at the beginning of the 7 Years' War. We all know he's a very decisive person, a decisive general for defeating Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right.
But the beginning of him is in the age of Frederick the Great, in the end of the 7 Years' War.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting aspect of his life is that, you know, he had interactions with probably two of the greatest military minds of the age with Frederick and Napoleon. So let's dive into his life a little bit. So Blucher, or you want to pronounce his first names for me? I believe it's Gebhard Leberecht von Blucher.
Gebhard Leberecht von Blucher.
Thank you very much. Was born in December 1742 in Rostock, North Germany. Can you tell us a little bit about his parents?
Yes, his father was a Rittmeister. That's captain of the cavalry.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in Prussian service, but there is a problem for making a family. You only can marry in Prussia beyond the rank of a major.
Mm-hmm.
So often the soldiers retire before they get the rank to make a family, to have a family.
Okay.
And he moved to Rostock, and there his father is Rittmeister Christian Friedrich von Blücher, and his mother Dorothea Marie, geborene Zülow, born as with the name Zülow. They are nobles, but very low nobles. And this is part of the beginning. Is like Blücher, his family was broke. They were out of money. They were nearly poor. And to escape this the turmoil of the 7 Years' War,
right?
He tried to bring out his son out of the reach of the soldiers. So Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, now Germany, was Swedish after the 30 Years' War.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the start of the story, I think, because he was moved to Rügen, that's an island,
mm-hmm.
and that was Swedish too. And in Prussia, there is a thing called Kantonsystem. So soldiers are taken out of the families in
mm-hmm.
one area and put in a special unit. So only for an example, Infantry Regiment number 5, Infantry Regiment number 5 has the city of Potsdam. So all with the birth in Potsdam are moved to this regiment and join the regiment. When they are not nobles, the nobles, of course, go to the cavalry.
Yeah. So
that's the story.
Yeah, no, that's a good intro to the story. He is from a lower nobility family, but like you said, they weren't rich or anything. So he begins his military career at 16 in a hussar regiment in the Swedish army.
Yes.
And I find this is odd because Sweden was at war at the time with Prussia during the 7 Years' War. So it's just weird because when you think of Blucher, You think of him in the Prussian army, not the Swedish army.
Yeah, the Swedish army was in war with Prussia, but they only did some skirmish things behind enemy lines. And there he joined the regiment, a regiment of hussars, and then he is captured by Prussians,
right,
and change the side. It's an age of mercenaries. We especially we at in Germany, we do not want to know that they are mercenaries. But in the 7 Years' War, it's not, of course, like the 30 Years' War. But if a side gives you the better opportunity, maybe money or something like that, you can change the side after a battle. So he gets captured by Belling Hussars.
right.
These guys wore the black uniform with the whole death on it. Everyone knows the Death Hussars with only the skull on it. On the hat.
Yep.
And there, this regiment from the officer, from the General von Belling, and in the turmoil, he was captured, and there are many stories about how he changed the sides. But I think it's the most realistic one is he got captured. He was asked, who were your parents? You can speak German. That's brilliant. You can speak German. Your parents? Oh, they were Prussians. Oh, we have opportunity. You can join the service. I think this is the most realistic thing. Not we say about something he was caught and on the belt and put on the saddle and they rode in the sunset. And then Blucher said, "Yeah, I want to be a Prussian hussar."
Yeah,
I think this is not true. He got the better offer.
So he becomes part of the Prussian military and becomes a natural leader of cavalry. But his boldness is sometimes he takes it too far. And in 1773, he resigns angrily from the Prussian army and receives kind of a reprimand from Frederick the Great, who says, quote, "Captain Blucher can take himself to the devil," end quote.
So a lot of his quotes, and it's very interesting, but it goes a little bit before. The third partition of Poland is the thing we have to focus here. And the Belling Hussars were used as a force to subdue the uprising there against the partition of Poland. For the audience who doesn't know the partition of Poland, Poland was divided under three powers. It's Russia, it's Austria, and it's Prussia.
That's right.
And in there, of course, we know of the Napoleonic Wars, especially like person of Poniatowski, who wanted to
reestablish
an independent Poland. And,
correct.
And of course, there were powers in the state too, and the people didn't want to be reigned by the Prussians. So, and in this turmoil, the Belling Hussars, as a skirmish power, were mobilized to subdue this
uprising.
This uprising, yes. Thank you. And the problem is, we do not know exactly what happened, but it seems very realistic that it have come to war crimes there. So maybe civilians has been shot, and then we confirm one thing. There was a priest who was involved in the uprising, a very important person, is a priest in Catholic Poland. And they made a fake execution with him.
Oh, right. Okay.
They dig a grave, stood him before, and shot with the guns above his head.
Okay.
And all this, instead of subduing the uprising, instead of that, the turmoil started anew. So, and this was for the king, it was impossible. This what happened. He wanted to make it quiet.
Right.
Yeah? He wanted to make it quiet. He wanted to reign. You have to see Frederick the Great is after the 7 Years' War. So in the last years of Frederick the Great, he wanted that Prussia was rebuilt.
Right.
And everything was focused on the old king of the Alter Fritz, we say.
Right.
Huh?
So he don't want a bunch of drama and noise during his last years of his life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I got
Exactly.
it. That makes sense.
So the problem was, then he got arrested, and this is cut out of the German sources, out of the German literature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Blücher is a hero for us. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
He was a hero until 1945.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
because maybe a person like Hitler also saw himself, claimed he saw himself in a tradition with Frederick the Great. So,
Right.
and in this thing, you had the narrative of born German heroes, and Blücher was exactly like that. But he got arrested, and we do not know how long, but some sources say for 8 months.
Okay.
After that, he couldn't get the rank of a major. So, as a major, you cannot have, as an Rittmeister, you cannot have a family. So he was excluded out of getting this rank, or out of getting the higher rank.
Right.
So, and this led to his frustration, that he retired and returned, or no, then he changed. He tried to be a landlord and a farmer.
Yeah. 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 It just sounds like Blucher and Frederick were just two very stubborn people, and neither one of them was going to back down.
I think they didn't have any connection to each other. So there are sources who say that when he saw the king crossed a street, they say that he took his horse and really begged on the streets that the king will take him back in service. But I'm not sure about that. But something like this must have happened.
Okay.
Huh?
So, like you say, he takes some time away, becomes a landlord, farmer, Freemason. But then,
exactly, and that's the problem, because he was a bad farmer. He was a bad landlord. He was a born soldier. So
right.
his duty was his destiny was the horse and the saber,
Right.
and not the plow. Yeah?
Okay. So in 1786, Frederick the Great dies, and Blucher returns to the army as a major, and he works his way up the ranks to become a general in 1794.
Yeah.
How would you describe his leadership style? I know his nickname was Old Marshal Forwards.
Yeah.
He wasn't. I mean, he knew tactics, but he wasn't a brainiac like Napoleon. How do you describe his leadership style?
Of course, he's not Napoleon Bonaparte. Of course, you cannot compare here. His leadership was, for his officers, very nice. The dinner is something what Blücher did until his last days. He invited his high officers any evening, except they were on the march, of course. But when they could have a rest, he invited them to a dinner.
Yeah.
And there, the problems of the day were in that conversation were discussed.
Yeah, and it seems like the soldiers liked work, like, even though he was very pushy and energetic, they liked serving under him. They liked him at the front. They liked seeing Marshal Blucher at the front.
Yeah, he was a charismatic person, and he was a father for them. They called him father, and he called them the children. Papa Blücher.
Yeah.
So I think in that age, I wanted to serve under Blücher.
Right.
Yeah? Of course. Right. So any Prussian thing would do that. Yeah?
Right. Well, he carries on, and Prussia is kind of watching how things go with Napoleon. And in 1806, Blucher was among the war party urging the King of Prussia to go to war with France and Napoleon.
Yeah.
Why do you think he was pushing for that? Like, why did he want to attack Napoleon?
So he loved his queen. And the Queen Louisa was a main power in the resistance against Napoleon Bonaparte. Of course, so this was one part. The second part is the most important. They did not fear the French, and they did not fear the ideas, but the ideas of the revolution carried guns.
Right.
I think it's William Pitt the Younger who used these words for that, and exactly that. It is a danger for Prussia and the system of Prussia. The reason why Prussia entered the war and the coalition was because France annexed the Western Western colonies, but the Western states which belong to Prussia.
Right.
And this is what was an abysmal. This was an insult for a state, for a proud state like Prussia, and a state which resisted France and Austria and Russia in the 7 Years' War. So impossible.
Yeah. You
They
make a good
had
point.
to enter a war, and the picture, what comes in mind, and that what was the spirit of 1806 was the officers who sharpened their sabers on the steps of the French embassy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
A very strong symbol, but it didn't went well.
No, it didn't end well at all. The 1806 duel battle of Jena-Auerstadt becomes a disaster for the Prussian army as they're manhandled in both battles. Blucher fights well at Auerstadt and covers the rear guard during the retreat. Why did the Prussians lose this battle? Was it overconfidence, or was it Napoleon was just so good? Like, what happened there?
It is on the high strategic level. In the tactical level, the Prussian soldiers were equal to the French. There are many historians who have the same opinion like me, and there are many reasons for it. At first, on the high strategic level, the Prussian High Command wanted to face the French out of their own territory, and used in that some columns which were far on a far on I would say 120 miles. On such a corridor, they wanted to face and intercept the French.
Right.
And Napoleon marched with his columns in a formation of a diamond. On two flanks and three columns and a rear guard and an avant-garde and like that. And in his march, he was able to concentrate his troops in a 24 hours. And this was at first the main strategical point in the high strategic level that Prussia could not face.
Right.
This is one thing. A second thing in lower strategic thing is the train. So in the age of the 7 Years' War, behind the Prussian army was a train, and like the other armies too. They tried to exclude, or they tried to not harm the people, not harm the farmers on the country. Of course, we know in any war the people have to suffer.
That's right, because when you're marching, sometimes you just steal things from farms, or you burn farms down, or you eat all their food. And
exactly. And the problem was the household of the officers were also in that train because they had the right in parts of the family. Only for example, Neidhart von Gneisenau, he was born in the train of his father. And I think I'm not sure about the date, but I wrote an article about Gneisenau of the date. I think it was a very important battle. But he was born on the train because the wives of the officers were in the train.
That train kind of slowed down the Prussian army then, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this, and of course, this makes it nearly impossible to maneuver such a huge army. So in the age of Frederick the Great and the 7 Years' War, we do not have these gigantic numbers which were deployed in the Napoleonic Wars. So, and the third point, I think the moral of the Prussian troops, when they saw that the catastrophe began, were out of the battle and did not fight to the end.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't senseless, but if you start the battle, and the problem is the Prussian leader, the Prussian high general, got a bullet between the eyes.
He did, yeah.
Then you lose your high commander.
Yeah.
And this makes his troops unsecure. And I think this is why Jena and Auerstedt became a disaster.
Yeah, you lose your high commander, your morale goes down, and yeah, it turns into kind of a rout. A few weeks later, Blucher loses. I mean, Napoleon overruns Berlin, and Blucher loses at the Battle of Lubeck and was compelled to surrender. But what I really like about Blucher is that he insisted clauses be written in the capitulation that stated that he surrendered due to lack of provisions and ammunition, and that his soldiers should be honored by the French troops, which they were. I think that shows that even though he was surrendering, he still had his morals and principles that, he would have kept fighting if he didn't run out of bullets.
Yeah, exactly. He really did that these terms were accepted, that his troops could march out of it and got captured with all their honor.
Yeah.
And not defeated. Yes. And one important thing, like that, so to surrender, it avoided that Lübeck was pillaged and sacked.
Good point.
For me, a very important point to capitulate.
Yep. No, you don't want the Lübeck to be destroyed. So he's captured, but then he's returned to the Prussian army after a prisoner exchange for Marshal Victor. And I always say that the Prussians got the better part of that deal.
Yes, maybe. I do not know if Marshal Victor got a higher command. He could do it better, maybe. But yes, but at this point, Bonaparte didn't know what Blücher, of course, later did.
Yeah.
And I think for him, at this point, he was a high commander, but he was not so high and not so significant, and he did not realize the potential of this man.
Right. And I think you make a good point. If he had known that he'd be such a thorn in his side later on, he probably wouldn't have let him go. Yeah.
Yes, and there is something, there are points in history we do not know. So we know very exactly that Blücher wasn't able to speak French. He could not speak French. And we also know that Napoleon Bonaparte later learned German. So they had a conversation. No one was there, only Napoleon Bonaparte and Blücher. And they had a conversation of 2 hours, and we do not know what they were talking about.
But it's interesting you bring that up because, after 1806, 1807, Prussia basically becomes a vassal state to Napoleon's empire, and Blucher kind of avoids court and begins to hate Napoleon with a vengeance. Like, he wants to kill Napoleon, like, later on. Why did he despise Napoleon so much? I know he respected him as a general. He hated the man of Napoleon.
Yeah, he respected him as a general, and respected him as a he always accepts that he is the emperor, and the emperor is of Deutsch der Kaiser. So he says der Kaiser, and that's a thing that he accepts his rank. And I think that this went through the whole Prussian world, that they all accept Napoleon Bonaparte as der Kaiser,
Mhm.
the emperor. Now, I think the most important thing is the Peace of Tilsit,
Right.
in which Prussia really lost its pride. 1807, the Peace of Tilsit is an insult for Prussia,
Yep.
and this makes Napoleon the absolute enemy. And then there begins the time, we call it in Germany Franzosenzeit, the time of the French.
Right.
And it's an occupation, and it's not funny. And Prussia has to pay 70 million francs a year in reparations.
That's a lot.
That's a lot for a state like Prussia. But compared to Austria, it's nothing. Austria had to pay much more, and after 1809, some more, even more, and it's a lot of money. But in there's hidden, of course, this the downfall of the kingdom of Prussia. In the same place is the rise of the Napoleonic power, because the Prussians paid it.
Right. Okay. Well, after Napoleon's disaster in Russia in 1812, the German War of Liberation begins in 1813. And Blucher was present at both the battles of Lutzen and Bautzen, which were losses for the Allies. They have a truce after that. Blucher helps to reorganize the Prussian army, and it seems like he has some very capable generals and subordinates working for him. Who are some of these guys? I know you mentioned Gneisenau before, but who are some of these guys that worked under Blucher?
Yeah, of course, Gneisenau is a very we have a focus on Gneisenau, of course, because he will be his chief of staff. And for the audience, it's very important to know how the German army worked after 1812, after the reforms of 1812. We have a double lead in the armies. Since then, we have the commander, and separate from that, we have the chief of staff. And the chief of staff is the strategical commander, and the commander is the tactical and the charismatic leader of the army. First was Scharnhorst, and Scharnhorst was a great man. He was the mastermind, the absolute mastermind of the Prussian army. But Lützen was the fall, the first battle. The Russo-Prussian coalition went into offensive and faced Napoleon and faced Marshal Ney at Großgörschen. It was a battle over four towns, Großgörschen, Kleingörschen, Kaya, and Rana. And there it comes to the absolute clash. And in there, Scharnhorst is wounded, Blücher is wounded, and Gneisenau is wounded too. But for Blücher and Gneisenau, it went well. But the leg of Scharnhorst got infected, and he later dies around 1 month. And this mastermind is a significant person.
Yeah, I don't think Scharnhorst gets enough credit. He's a very smart guy.
Absolutely, and Gneisenau, of course, but Gneisenau also doesn't get the credit in his lifetime after it, because Gneisenau was a person who he was brilliant. He was really a brilliant planner. He managed to defend Kolberg in 1807 to the last day with maneuvers. That he learned that from the American troops, because he was part of the expedition troops in the US. But he did not went to battle when he arrived when Yorktown War was already over. And this Gneisenau later plays the decisive role for Blücher.
Right.
And the third is von Müffling, but von Müffling really gets in service in Bautzen, not in Lützen. He didn't know what position he has, but significant as a commander and a leader and a liaison officer, he gets the position in Lützen.
No, and I'd like to tell my audience to look up those three commanders because they're pretty interesting people, Gneisenau, von Muffling, and Scharnhorst. So getting back to our protagonists, so Blucher scores a major victory against Marshal MacDonald at the Battle of Katzbach, and then helps secure a victory for the Allies at the huge Battle of Leipzig. And I think this one's critical because it was his fourth battle against Napoleon himself, and the first time he emerged victorious.
Yeah.
It seems to me that kind of almost like Marshal Massena on the other side, that defeats never really deterred or bothered Blucher. He was always ready to fight again the next day. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think at any time we say, what was capable? What was Blucher's strategical thinking?
Mm-hmm.
How did his brain work in battle? And we say, all what he could is aggressivity, is an aggressive advance.
Mm-hmm.
But exactly that was his strategy. Because in the past, anytime you let Napoleon Bonaparte making the first step in the battle, he won.
That's
the
right.
others lost.
That's right.
So to make the first step for Blucher is a significant and important thing. The Katzbach is after 1 month of peace, the peace of 1813. 1 month, Napoleon Bonaparte draws troops and brings them back from Spain and has to raise the cavalry. And the Katzbach is a very important battle, one of my favorite battles in the Napoleonic Wars. It's a battle of cold steel.
Yeah,
it's the rain that ruins the campaign in 1813 for Napoleon Bonaparte, and there he wins. And it is why it is so important for Blücher and for York, his second commander. I will speak when it goes about Leipzig. I will speak about York, and there they get their titles.
Yeah, and just for my audience, the Battle of Katzbach was kind of it was Marshal MacDonald being overly aggressive and leading the French across the river. Exactly. But what happens if you cross the river, then your back is to the river, and when the rain started to come down, so the muskets wouldn't work. And as my guest alluded to, it just came down to cold steel bayonets, and the Prussians pushed the French into the river.
Yes, but this happens in the end. They were crushed and ran with a bayonet they rammed the bayonet into the French boys, and it was cruel. It was a carnage. And then they were pushed in the Wilde Neisse. It's a part of the Neisse, and the river was very high because of the heavy rain, and it was a slaughter for the French.
Right.
And then Leipzig. It comes to Leipzig, and this is a strategic, very brilliant thing that they encircled Napoleon here, and he wanted to accept the battle.
Right.
And there are 3 hell rides of the Prussian army in the history of the Prussian army, and they are all in the Napoleonic Wars. And the first of these hell rides, this is at Leipzig.
Mm-hmm.
In Leipzig, there's the hell ride because already on I'm not sure about if it's already on the 16th or the 17th October 1813, there's a town Möckern in north of Leipzig, and there is Marmont, Marshal Marmont with his Marines and Polish infantry.
Right.
And they were all tough guys. Any one of them. And there the Silesian army under Blücher and York enters the battle and storm. And they storm Möckern and try to crush the northern flank. And in the end, Marmont positions his cannons perfectly, and he shots the Silesian army into pieces with grapeshot and canister. It must be brutal.
Right. Yeah.
It must be brutal. But in the end, there was one thing. Only one unit was left. It was the Prussian reserve cavalry of the corps of York, the Brandenburgian Hussars, and the Lithuanian dragoons under Oberst von Jürgers. And with the last man, with the last attack, they break the lines of the French and crush the northern flank.
Right.
And this is what Alexander sees. And there Blücher gets the name Marschall Vorwärts, or Marshal Paschal, like the Cossacks said.
Yeah.
And we can say that a part of the battle was won in Möckern.
Yeah. And it was a huge loss for Napoleon. In just moving along, in the 1814 invasion of France after Leipzig, Blucher and the Allies suffered a few sharp defeats against Napoleon, who's defending, the fatherland at this point. During this time, Blucher's health has been severely affected by the strains of campaigning, and he kind of suffers a mental breakdown. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Thank you for the question, John. I love that question. Blücher thought he was impregnated by an elephant, or he was pregnant by an elephant. This is the thing, and we laugh about that. And I was shocked when I heard that. Of course, I only read German books, so and I thought, how could in the Anglo-American literature this claim appear that Blücher was pregnant by an elephant? And I searched a bit, and I found a source of von Boyen. Von Boyen was another famous general who met Blücher the first time. I think it was 1807-8 or in 9 or 11. And there Blücher is very sick, and he sees shadows on the wall, and he draws his saber and beats and sees Napoleon in the darkness, and but with very high fever, and he nearly died at that point. And there, the first time he says, "I am pregnant by an elephant," in the high fever. So this is the first time. The second time we have here the passage you see, because the exhausted army of Silesia had, and the Prussian army in its whole thing had the problem with water, with clean water. So the typhus aroused, the typhus made many sick of the soldiers. And at this point, the Prussian High Command was sick, and it seems it was the typhus, or the second possibility, the pseudotyphus. There's a bacteria which is not so aggressive like the first salmonella here.
Right.
And he lay down and nearly got blind, and must have been a huge pain in his stomach and in the abdomen. And there he should have said, "I am pregnant by an elephant," in his sickness.
Right.
So, and nearly he lost their commander, and York wanted to replace him, but what is impossible, the troops only followed Blücher. And the third source for that is 1815, when he fell down as a 73 years old man in a horse race. And there it is a British lord, I forgot his name. He was very close to Wellington. And there Blücher should have said, it was a conversation in French. And he said, j'ai un éléphant là. So, and there's the problem. I have an elephant there in French. Blücher wasn't able to speak French, but we have an idiom in German. We say I'm strong or resilient like an elephant.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, no, I can't fall down. I'm 73 years old. I'm Blücher. No, I'm an elephant. I'm strong.
Strong.
And I think these three facts led to the assumption, led to the people think that Blucher really thought he was impregnated by an elephant.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, thank you for explaining that. So Paris eventually falls to the Allies in March 1814, and Blucher is showered with awards. He even visits England, where he's treated as a celebrity everywhere he goes. Do you think he enjoyed that downtime a little bit?
Mutual. It was mutual, I think, in Britain. He impressed the British, I think, because this old man who never get out of the saddle and does all the things in which the young man died, and he survives, and he is absolutely treated like a hero there. And so he liked it, because one thing you have to know about Blucher, he was always broke. He never had enough money until the end of the Napoleonic War. Any saber he got donated by some royals, he sold it. He sold the material to send it home and for his lifestyle, or for a horse, or horses for his men, maybe. Yeah. So this was a great time for him, and no Prussian soldier really got the honor from their king. And then there is another country which hates Napoleon Bonaparte and treats him like a hero. And this was something special for him. They painted pictures of him, and then it was mutual, and he enjoyed the time.
Yeah.
He wrote back to home to his young wife. They're brilliant people, these English guys.
Yeah, it sounds like a good time. He retires to Silesia, but Napoleon's escape from Elba in 1815 requires Blucher to go back to the front in Belgium in the famous Waterloo campaign. But before we get to Waterloo, the Prussians suffer a really hard-fought defeat at the Battle of Ligny. And Blucher's captured by the French. Can you tell us what happened in that battle?
Napoleon Bonaparte tried to separate the Allied armies and tried to beat one after another. And he thought it would be very smart to beat Blucher first, because Blucher would rather join Wellington than Wellington would join Blucher in the hour of emergency. So he attacked him first, and then I'm a German. I cannot say it's a routing defeat or something like that.
No,
but it's the Prussians could retreat very disciplined.
Yeah.
And there, it's the second hell ride. The second hell ride is Blucher, because he lines up his reserve cavalry and he joins his own troops in the first line. And with this motivation, they try to buy their infantry time to retreat. And it's not sure. The sources do not know exactly. I had some discussions with French historians and French sources. The Prussian cavalry is cut down, and I think it was cuirassiers, French cuirassiers, who cut them down. He falls under his horse and buried under his horse for 6 hours.
Yeah, he's trapped there. And the story goes that some French cavalry rolled by, and was it the chief of staff who covered him up, so no one would know who?
Exactly. His assistant officer there, it is von Nostitz, Graf von Nostitz, Count von Nostitz, and he takes his coat and covers him. The lights go out for him.
Right.
And he throws his coat over Blucher, that they do not see his decorations.
Right.
And they ignore him.
Right.
They ignore him until the Prussians come back to get him out of that. And in that moment, Gneisenau doesn't know that Blucher is still alive. And there he takes, he is responsible, and his decisive decisions is that his drawback is not to the Rhine,
Right.
but to Wavre.
Wavre, yeah. Yeah, you always wonder, though, if the French had captured or killed Blucher at that moment, if things would have turned out different.
Yeah.
Um,
Lucky for us.
Yeah, lucky, that's right. But moving on to the next few days at the famous Battle of Waterloo, Blucher secures victory for the Allies by flanking Napoleon while he's engaged with the Duke of Wellington. Now, I don't want to get into too much of the battle because it could be a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
But Blucher's there and there's a quote. He's saying 4 words, quote, "I hear you say it is impossible, but it has to be done. I've given my promise to Wellington, and you surely don't want me to break it. Push yourselves, my children, and we'll have victory," end quote.
Yes, in the German narrative, it's nearly the same words. It could only change a bit. It's you do not know. I have to go to my brother Wellington. That's the German narrative. You should have said that.
Right.
Yeah, it's at this point he is such a charismatic person. We wonder how could this old man? I think I'm 43, and sometimes I feel tired.
Right.
And this man falls under hose, 6 hours, stands up, and fights the battle of the century. This is impossible, but there's an answer. He did nothing than that in his life.
Yeah.
He was born in the saddle. He stayed in the saddle. He never stopped sitting in the saddle and fighting or hunting or something like that. Yeah. So, and there, this old marshal, and there it comes. I see this old marshal before me at the campfire, and he smokes his pipe. His pipe is you see is a very important thing for Blucher. He is always seen with a pipe. He kept this pipe between his teeth, and he rides from position to position. Go boys, forward. And his heart is on that because he gave Wellington the promise that he will be in time and beat the scourge of Europe.
Right. Now, this next question is very controversial. Would the Allies have defeated Napoleon without Blucher and the Prussians there?
Oh, God. Then you put me in a very difficult position, and I will be contested and disputed in there. I think Napoleon Bonaparte wouldn't have got Mont Saint-Jean. I think Wellington would have defended his position, but I think Napoleon Bonaparte wouldn't have beaten in that way, that he couldn't recover from that. This was the Prussian thing, and I do not want to say, okay, it was us, the Prussians, or it was them, the British alliance. So I really have to say it was us. It was Europe. It was the will of the peoples. It was the will of the folks of Europe to beat him.
Yeah, you make an interesting point though. Kind of like if the Prussians had not have shown up, maybe it would have been like a quatre bras, where it was like a stalemate, where like neither side retreated, but they just would have fought all day without any conclusion. Maybe that's how it would have gone. But of course the Prussians did show up, and Napoleon had to divert troops to face the Prussians. We know what happened. Napoleon lost Waterloo and had to abdicate a second time. What happens to Blucher after Napoleon's gone and he retires?
Yeah, he retired. He goes back to his goods, to his stables, and becomes father. He was a loving father, really. He has 3 kids, and he goes back and becomes father and grandfather for his children. And one thing is very important. Now he has enough money. He was seen afterwards he was a gambler. He has very, very high debts, and in his younger days, and now he can pay them all, but he still sits on the table gambling.
Right.
And when you saw in these days an old man who puts 4 pieces of gold on the gambling table, they said, look, this is Blucher, this is the old general. And his last words, he has some last words who was put in his mouth, but they are very poetic, and I do not think he really said that, but it was like, now I look in the mouth and the fire of the cannons like I ever did before. His last words, and then he passed away, and it was a hard thing. The heritage of Blücher is very difficult, because his mausoleum was pillaged by the Russians in 1945.
Right.
His corpse was gone. They did not find him his body anymore,
right.
And a sad thing, yeah. And but in him, it shows for me something: never underestimate an elder person.
Right. So
never. This is what Blücher shows me for myself. I think for the German heritage, we have a person, we have our heroes. If we go exactly at the person, we don't see he wasn't a god. He was a strong person, but he wasn't a god. He could be wounded. He had his troubles. He had his devils, his demons in him. Yeah, but he was a great person.
And I think that's what his legacy is. You know, when Prussia was down and the French had occupied, and you know, the morale, like you said, was really low. Like in 1806, 1807, there was this one guy, Blucher, who refused to, you know, cow or submit to Napoleon. He was like the kind of like the shining star during the dark times.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just an interesting guy, and I thank you for telling us about Marshal Blucher. I recommend all my listeners learn more about him. Just really interesting guy. And Philip, I thank you for joining the show. One more time, if you want to follow Philip, it's Pertinax on Twitter.
Pertinax, Pertinax, Pertinax.
Got it. And yeah, he has some really great content he posts there. And it was a pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure for me, John. Really, thank you.
Thank you.
It was a nice time.